And we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome for those of you that are watching on YouTube. And let's just record on the cloud. I feel we've got to have James Lotnick coming to this one, don't you think? Did you see the background though, Brittany? I don't know if you saw the full background.
I love it.
I love that one too.
I feel bad for his skin. I just painted a bedroom and I got some paint on my arm and it was so hard to get it off. Now, granted, that was like latex wall paint and not whatever shiny silver makeup that guy has. But I do not envy anyone trying to get all of that paint off their face.
But it does come down to the idea of, and I love wordplay, right? I love the fact that cult is in the word culture. I love the fact that fan and fanatic, fan is really, I guess, short for fanatic anyway, but maybe that's just something we forgot. It's not like, oh, that's clever. Look at the copywriter, look at the wordsmith who just realized that the word fan is in fanatic. Well, where do you think it comes from? And that's, like you said, something I thought very profound on the show, which is, we broke this. We broke trust. We messed it up. And we may not be able to fix it. Or at least we, we're going to have to work really hard to fix it. And that's the thing. It's like, if we really talk about raving fans and super fans, then we have to be able to have a conversation about being a fanatic in a good way, right? Being a zealot in a good way. I'll just say, the original, something I often will talk about in context of being a zealot. Well, zealots fell on their sword. Zealots basically killed themselves. If you think of the religious connotation for what they believed in, they drew their own blood. And today we actually have a less tragic and a less fatal version of drawing one's own blood, which is a tattoo. That is essentially defacing your skin and drawing blood for a cause that you believe in. And I just think it's like a very interesting way to say, this isn't as far-fetched or extreme as you might think. It's actually quite natural and normal.
I think the degree to which it is natural and normal depends to a large extent on the mental health of the audience that you're serving or trying to serve. And what one of the chat comments that I saw during the broadcast that we didn't talk about on screen was somebody asking about like the darker side of this and the darker side of fandom or standom, as we use a lot in pop culture. And that certainly exists. And you have those people who are so fanatical, and what happens is the cause becomes so wrapped up in their identity. It becomes such a part of how they self-identify, and they believe in this cause that they do, radicalize, for lack of a more appropriate term. And you see this when like cultures or fandoms, groups of fans are at war with each other online. You see it a lot in pop culture and music and sports, or even like, Meghan Markle fans versus Kate Middleton fans, absolutely stupid, meaningless stuff. These groups of people who have become so indoctrinated in this belief system that to a large extent is self-created and self-perpetuating. And they're like so ready to like go pick up, their rifle and like go have a fight about it, that they war with these other fandoms. And that's a very scary thing, I think, for a lot of brands and a lot of people, because I don't think we as a culture have like figured out the best way to deal with it yet. And we're watching it play out in real time. But you have those like fanatical, crazy people. And there was an interesting study from Nielsen a few years ago where they were asking people, basically the question was like, do fans have ownership of the things that they are fans of, or should they have some level of ownership? And the younger the respondent, the more likely they were to say yes, to the point that with Gen Z, it was like 98% of Gen Z respondents said, yes, fans are entitled to ownership of the things that we support because we are creating that brand. We are building it. We are creating it. We deserve to co-create in a way. Like we deserve to have a say in the storylines of these TV shows, and we deserve to have equity in these brands. Like ideas that to older people sound crazy, but to younger people, I'm generalizing, but that's, statistically speaking, that to younger people, that they just think of fandom differently. They see themselves as part of the story, as part of the tribe who are entitled to some ownership of these things. And it's a really, interesting shift that the internet has empowered and accelerated, and it'll be unique. It'll be a unique time in human history unfolding over the next couple of decades as we see how all of this is going to impact what it means to build, grow, and scale a brand.
So you, this is why I love the after show, to have this conversation right now. I see Jan just arrived as well. I think the question in might have come from Tom, but I want to ask you a question, which is that really, did you call it, first of all, standom? Did I get that?
Standom, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So STANDOM.
Yeah.
So are those real fans, right? Or maybe the question is, we are living in a world now where there are these turf wars. I mean, it's almost like it's like West Side Story, but like in terms of advocacy, it sounds ridiculous. But this, in this day and age of kind of cancel culture, where we're attacking, whether we attack with, where we attack with votes, we attack with words, we attack with social media. Do we need to pull it back? Because I really appreciate this counter perspective from you, and all I could think of, but is this still what you and I believe in, or is it something else? And should we call it that?
No, this is absolutely not what we believe in. This is a totally different thing. It 100% should be pulled back. And on the pop culture side, what you see is a lot of times the celebrities saying like, chill, like, I don't need you coming to my defense, right? Like, I'm not trying to have my fans war with your fans. And, Katy Perry and Taylor Swift, both of whom are clients that I've worked with, have each spoken about this because for a while they were on the opposite sides of it. And there was this, rift that started as a misunderstanding between the two of them, and the media blew it into this crazy thing. And so they had these warring fan bases, and the belief that's perpetuated was like, they're diametric opposites. You cannot be a fan of both. You have to choose one or the other. It's black or white. You have to be on this side or that side. And I think we see so much of that in our culture, especially in politics, but now on social issues. I mean, what happens, like your question of like, how far does it go? It goes so far that the stupidest shit in the world becomes polarized. Like all of a sudden you can like be anti-science and like, that's an okay thing. Like, it's so stupid. Like we've created an environment for this me versus you, us versus them, this side versus that side belief system to become such a big part of people's identities. Like people are so quick to say like, I'm this or I'm that. And because they're internalizing it as like part of their identity, especially if they've shared it publicly in some way on social media, like there's this huge portion of the population that doesn't want to go back and say like, I was wrong or my opinion has evolved. So they just like double down and continue to be on whatever side they're on.
So I just want to give one more example, which is a while back, I actually had my co-author who wrote Xero with me, where, and the acronym is Zealots, Entrepreneurship, Retention, and Owned Assets. And we kind of did almost an update to say, well, how does Team Trump score on Xero? Because one might argue that that's the quintessential case study for Xero.
Absolutely.
And then we looked at Biden in the after show as well. And one thing that just kind of struck me right now is when Trump's use of Twitter to disintermediate the media, to build these direct relationships with customers, was one of the most innovative uses or entrepreneurial uses of a platform or even of politicking ever in the history of politics. And what I realize now is he hasn't really done much since. But then suddenly I'm thinking this constant retweeting of everyone, of course, massively dangerous because he's not actually looking at what he's retweeting. But what he is doing is acknowledging. What he is doing is validating. What he is doing is saying, you are important and I am validating you, which actually feeds into the superfan methodology. Of course, the danger is that he's not actually looking at what they're saying. He's just saying, I see you. And of course, we can argue and we can debate until the cows come home. But I will say that I don't think for 1 second that he is doing the retweeting because he just, I mean,
He may
I
do
think
some of it.
he may do some of it, but they're
But not some
literally,
of it.
there's probably literally every, which basically means that if I was to tweet, I'm telling you that every single tweet, every single one is probably seen, and everyone that seems to be from one of those, people like so, those are the people getting retweets. So it's just an interesting thought. As I said, we can I'll let some of the others. I see Stacey's here, and I think Michelle is here. You can continue on this thread. You can change it.
This is the longest. This is the longest I've ever stayed quiet, Brittany. I'm a super listener, but I'm not a quiet listener because I made already 2 pages of notes on. This is the most fun session in a very long time. You were great today. You were the perfect guest. And if we could just get Joseph to wear polka dots, it would just liven up everything.
Have you Venmo'd me yet? By the way, I'm
yeah,
looking.
right. I'm looking into that.
My Venmo is at Brittany Hodak. Very easy to remember.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm the guy who asked the thing about brands. The question that originally occurred to me is, does every brand that breeds super fans also breed super foes, and thereby is polarizing to some extent, like in sports and in music, right? You have the lovers and the haters, and you mentioned a good example from entertainment. But like I've got Fender guitars all over my office, right? I don't hate Gibsons. I like Gibsons, but I'm a Fender super fan. I've got probably 5 Fender guitars. I'm a Martin super fan, but I don't hate Taylor guitars. You could be a Chevy guy, not hate Fords, not have those obnoxious stickers, on your truck or everything. I wonder, Aristotle said something relevant to what you and Joseph were just talking about. And he said, for every virtue, there are 2 vices, the vice of too little and the vice of too much. When we talk about zealotry, when we talk about fanatic, when we talk about obsessed, we're using those terms metaphorically if we're referring to that golden zone that is the virtue, right? Because for everybody who has a brand, they don't want customers out there to have the too little connection. But if they have the too much connection, it gets into this strange stuff that Robert De Niro ought to be portraying, right? In the movie made about this. So we want that golden zone in the middle, the virtue zone of super fandom. And I can see how brands can attain that, like Fender, like when J.K. Rowling, I think about fan fiction. J.K. Rowling's books, the Potter books, created this huge genre of fan fiction. And some of those super fans became famous authors in their own right, like the Hunger Games person, But I just wanted to pose that to you guys. Do you think that we're always playing with fire as we cultivate? And see, I see all this as so positive, right? Philosophy, I'm a philosopher. Philosopher needs a few super fans. If Socrates had just had some super fans, it could have ended differently, right? So I want to have a very positive view of this, and I do. And the stuff you said about it, the acronyms and everything are awesome. How do we avoid the dark side is the question.
So that's a fantastic question. And I think it comes back to the integrity of the brand. Mm-hmm. And especially now on like social justice issues, you have so many brands standing up and saying, if you don't like this, cool, we don't want you as part of our family. Like they're kicking them out of their brand family. They're saying, if you want to identify as a super fan of us, you are going to espouse the same values and beliefs that we do to an extent. Otherwise, we are not afraid to cancel you, right? Like we will disassociate ourselves with you. And I think historically, we've seen brands be very hesitant to do that, right? Especially like the bigger, more legacy, more established brands haven't wanted to take a stance, haven't wanted to step up and say, you have crossed a line, you personally have crossed a line. Right. And I think that so many of us were brought up in the school of the customer is always right. Now what people are starting to not be afraid to acknowledge the truth that not only is the customer not always right, the customer is not always welcome or wanted or a good person. Like customers can be assholes. And I think for brands that, you know, it's so easy now with social media for them to take a stand and say, you know what, you are a hateful, terrible person, and we don't want you to buy our stuff anymore. You're not invited to this party. You are no longer here, I think is a fantastic thing. And to your point of that virtue of too little, too much. Now, the part where that gets crazy and dicey and potentially litigious is the people who have some sort of psychological problem, right? Like the people who are like, this brand said something bad about me. Now I'm going to go take an assault rifle and show up at their headquarters. Right. And that I think is, I mean, clearly the problem of mental health is the undercurrent of like lots of things happening right now across the world, but especially in the United States. And so that's, I think the one tricky part of it is like, how does a brand respond appropriately, but in a way that is not empowering somebody who may not be all there to have a disproportionate reaction to the adverse attention?
Yeah, that's a really important point, I think. A friend of mine, Alan Murray, the Fortune CEO, has been talking a lot recently about how CEOs are increasingly not just seeing business as a profit machine, but as an engine for good in the world, right? To improve the human condition. And so that's going to involve bringing in all these values and sort of attaching your brand to values that will inherently attract some people and not others, right? And so the mental health spectrum, and there's always a spectrum in human life about everything, right? There are people who obviously that, you know, a brand can't worry about those people because no matter what happens, those people are going to grab the gun and go do something, you know. But it is something to be thinking about as we become more explicit about the values we endorse and support.
But I think I just want to, and also just to let the others know, I see Mr. Jeffrey Cottrell is here.
Hey, Jeff.
who is back. You see, this is what happens, Brittany. Once you become a guest, I lure you into my web and you can't stay away.
I love it.
So you can come back any day. And I just want to say to the others that are on as well, if you want to jump in, you can. You know, Brittany, and based on Tom's fantastic build, I love the fact that you've brought in yet another layer of this conversation, which is mean customers, because it's not a new thought, you know, this concept of fire your customer. Yeah. I loved how you brought it back to that old, antiquated and outdated, you know, rule number one, the customer is right. Rule number two, if the customer is wrong, see rule number one. No, actually, sometimes you have to fire your customer. And I think even borrowing this idea from, you know, the Katy Perrys of the world is being able to say, you know what, I don't actually need you to fight this battle for me. And actually you're being quite mean. Right. And that's, and those are inconsistent with the values that we actually, you know, this, Stacey, I know you'll like this concept, the concept of, which I did too, right? Connecting, because, you know, the whole concept of branding and brand building is wrong, because what happens is it's all about us. We are the flame, and our customers, just consumers, flock to us like a moth to flame. And it's all about us. In your case, what you're saying is it's not even customer centric. It's a partnership. It's your story and my story, or our story. And when we can connect, that's when the real magic happens. And sometimes if people want to hijack that story, maybe they need to find someone else to kind of bully.
Right. And as a brand, not being afraid to push back and say, no, actually, I'm not going to let you co-opt my brand's identity.
That's integrity, right?
Love that word, integrity. I'm going to jump in here. I love that, Tom, that you brought up on the main chat about the Grateful Dead, and I'll bring another music example in. I love, Brittany, the way that you're connecting personal stories of your customers to the brand story. That connection between the two, I think, is really relevant. And I'm going to bring up Bob Dylan. You know, I mean, do customers own the brand that they're fans of? And we're all familiar with the pivot that Bob Dylan made back in the day, from the folky stuff to the hard edge stuff, and people threw stuff at him and booed him off the stage. But ultimately, he won in the end by having that integrity to stick with his brand and really embrace his community in a very different way than I think brands today embrace their community. I think he did the thing of showing that the thing that attracted people to the Bob Dylan brand was his integrity. And had he, you know, walked off that stage and decided to go back into folk music at that moment, I think it would have destroyed the very super fans that he'd created. So he had to act with that rudder. And I think that's an example that brands can follow today, to both embrace their super fans and really have that rudder of integrity that hopefully is what attracted people to become fans in the first place.
So that's a great point.
Absolutely, such a great point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's a great point. It intersects with my being a super fan of Fender guitars, which is what he took on the stage at that controversial folk festival, and you know, blew away half his fan base, right? But then the guitar he took up on the stage, it eventually had its super fans as big as the Dylan super fan base. And it's interesting to see things like that coincide, right? I mean, this is back to the idea of partners. Brittany, I bring up a lot on this after show, and I'm a guest who will not go away, by the way. So it does happen. I bring up a lot of.
We've tried
everything, you know. I keep popping
like, Tom, we switched the show. It's at 3 p.m. now.
Yeah, right. That's next.
Don't show too.
Well said. Well said.
I don't know if you can hear me. I've been having some audio problems, but I've been in. Oh, great. I'm just loving the show. So thank you very much, Brittany and Joseph, as always. And Stacy's points were amazing, as are Tom's always. And it makes me think, if you haven't mentioned this, which is when I'm working with brands, this seems to now be authenticated. And that is long in the hospitality business, I think, there's been a lesson for brands, which is the wait staff, the employees, the staff internally has to feel good about what they're doing first. So, you know, the idea of customers not being first or customers not being right is particularly true because of that lesson, at least was to me. I forget who the famous chef was. Maybe it was Colicchio or someone who said, you know, no, my first concern, my first promise is to my employees. They need to be happy first, because if they're happy, then the customers will be happy. So what it makes me think is Bob Dylan or whoever the brand is can't produce great work, truly great work, unless they feel totally comfortable and honest in making that work. So, you know, so if they're trying to, I think as Joseph pointed out in the recent show with Jeff Hazlett, if they're not picking a side, you know, if they're not making a commitment to a point of view, how can they really be happy? You know, honestly happy. Yeah. So that's my point.
It's about the integrity of the person and the partnership. That's what I wanted to say to Brittany, that on this show, I keep bringing up a lot of great world literature that focuses on the power of partnership. And from Beowulf and Gilgamesh to through history, people who try to do it alone, who don't partner up. And there's a sense in which the super fans, the good super fans, are proper partners of the brand, right? But the partners within the brand have to be doing something really good and really exciting and really positive so that they can reach out and include people in ways that will serve their sense of identity. And I'll say one more thing and I'll shut up. Yesterday, I was on a Zoom with a Princeton professor who had the same scholarship I had at UNC Chapel Hill, whose specialty is debt in society and human dignity. for people who are on the lower half of society, who are in debt all the time and feel terrible about themselves and feel they're disrespected, feel they have no dignity. All these credit agencies are after them. And a point that came up in our call yesterday, and you're saying to yourself, what does this have to do with what we're talking about? The point that came up in our call is that every world culture prior to the present has had wisdom traditions in whose narratives people had their sense of identity and their sense of dignity and their sense of worth and their sense of specialness. And in our time, we don't have a shared wisdom framework for that. And so part of the appeal of brands is the appeal of the tribes that surround the brands, whether they're the Fender players or whether they're the Dylan fans or whether they're whatever. And so we're seeing in modern politics a kind of a new level of plugging into that. And it has as much danger as it has promise. But that's just something to be aware of. Where do we get our sense of worth, our sense of value, our sense of dignity, our sense of integrity? It should never be wholly tied up with, I guess, what we could call a commercial brand. But commercial brands can, when done right, add to that, participate in that, if they represent the right values. And then we get into some really deep stuff, which is so cool. I'm surprised philosophy doesn't have more super fans.
Hey, Brittany, I wonder if Patagonia, first of all, how they even got the idea, or maybe it came from one employee to, on the reverse side of their label, write "Vote the assholes out."
Yeah.
And if they then raised that to all their employees and said, "Hey, are you guys all for this? Because if you are, we're going to print it. We're going to go with it." And if there were any people who said, "I don't really actually share that view, but the majority do, so we've established that we're going to go with it." I wonder how that happens.
I wonder about the conversation too. And the interesting thing about that is that they chose to use the term assholes plural. And so how is anybody going to be opposed to that stance? Because whatever side you're on, if you think the other side is filled with assholes, you want to vote them out. Like it's very, I thought that was very smart. That was. You're right. It would be interesting to see how they did it. But
that was clever.
I wonder if it originally was plural, or if someone made it plural as it was going up the chain.
Of course, that's the brilliance of it, because by being plural, what it encourages is the civic duty and right of voting, rather than being a partisan thing at all. It becomes a citizenship thing. That's the beauty of it, I think.
Yeah.
I love that. And I mean, besides everything you said, you just know though that Patagonia is, I mean, you don't just know, it's obvious they've picked a side, based on changing the entire mission statement to saving the planet. And did you guys know that they restated the entire mission statement, and the mission statement is to save the planet?
Wow.
Well, they also, I think the president or CEO came out recently and admitted that they failed in terms of social justice or diversity in their own company.
So there's an honesty. All right, so we are at 30 minutes, and I realize that I am situated right in his mouth. I mean, how's this for an angle? He's breathing down my neck. This has been awesome, Brittany. I will send you an email with my previous guests know this, with all the various links, and I will create a little Corona bite, which is a 60-second highlight of the show, which is really getting increasingly difficult when you see Tom's notes. How do you find one highlight from a show and a guest like Brittany? It's impossible.
I just love that you're calling it a Corona bite.
Corona bite, yeah.
Oh, there's Corona
would
cocktails.
You like a Corona bite? No thanks.
Well, as you know, as Tom has explained to me, a Corona is a crown and a ring of light.
A ring of light.
And a beer. So it's like I'm telling you, the more I think about it, the more I just want to keep the show called Corona TV, when hopefully we can put the virus in our rearview mirror. Because I want to. Sorry. Or really, Is that the update? Oh,
I mean, maybe
Well,
by
you know,
2023 we'll have a plan.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it really depends on what happens in a few weeks' time. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, listen, if there is an interesting message here as we wind down, and I'll just say goodbye to the people on YouTube, and